Is this on? Oh, that is on. Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming today to this Thursday installment of our guest lecture series. This is the last of them for this semester, and we will resume in about a month. We'll start our summer guest lecture series. For those of you who will be around during the summer, for one reason or another, we have a guest lecture series that we do run in the summer as well, so we look forward to that. Let me tell you a little bit about our two visitors here today. They are a husband and wife team, Janette Blackburn and Tom Doolittle. Jan graduated from the program with a B.Arch in 1984. She was a Fulbright Scholar to Finland at the Helsinki Institute of Technology following her completion of the B.Arch here. She's worked for several small firms in New England before joining Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott in 1989, and she's currently a senior associate at that firm with a practice focusing on academic facilities for colleges and universities. Her recent projects include Fondren Library at Rice University, Lincoln Hall Music Building at Cornell University, and the restoration of McKim Meaden White's Avery Art and Architecture Library at Columbia. Her partner, Tom Doolittle, graduated from the College of Architecture and Planning at Ball State in 1983 with a BLA and a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Design. He received the Award of Outstanding Achievement from the college's Alumni Governing Board in 2003. He's also received several awards for projects from organizations such as the Ohio Planning Conference, the Ohio chapter of the ASLA, the International Downtown Association, and Move Massachusetts. He's made presentations on transportation and pedestrian design issues at ASLA, the National Pedestrian Conference, the Transportation Research Board, and Walk 21. He sits on the board of directors of Walk Boston, a pedestrian advocacy organization. Tom is also Associate VP with HNTB Corporation in Boston and serves as the Director of Urban Design and Planning for the company's Northeast Division. He specializes in the design of large-scale urban transportation projects and particularly in developing appropriate and comfortable pedestrian environments as a complement to streetscape, highway, and other infrastructure improvement programs. I'm delighted to have a chance to introduce them here today. They've been good friends of the college for a long time, and it's a rare opportunity for us also to have a husband and wife team who can come back and talk about their practices, hopefully in some entwined way, maybe not, but we're delighted to have you back. They've also brought their two kids with them who are sitting in the front row here and taking notes. So Tom and Jan, how would you like to do this? Well, let's welcome them first of all.
Sound check. People hear me okay? We're delighted to be here today, and it's a really interesting experience to be on the other side of the lecture hall for a change for me after having been through many lectures at CAP and those lectures where you couldn't hear the person talking or their slides were bad or it was of no interest whatsoever. So we've tried to put together a lecture for you that has a little bit for everybody in the room. You could call it the combo platter of what you can do with degrees in environmental design. My work has focused, as Joe said, on college and university campuses, everything from interior renovation projects to restoration to new construction. And Tom's worked at a much larger scale on civic and highway projects. Can we take a poll of who we have here? How many are landscape architecture students? Okay, and architecture? Couple? Yeah, I know. Busy and sleep deprived. How about urban design? Any urban planning or historic preservation? One, okay. Okay. I got to make sure I get my facts right then when I talk about historic preservation. Okay. I'm going to jump right in here. 4 projects in the Northeast is the title. First project I'm going to talk about is the Gottesman Libraries at Teachers College at Columbia University. This is a project I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years, and we've just finished phase 1, which was renovation of about 75,000 square feet of interior space. The existing building, when we first arrived and looked at the project, the building was just crumbling. They called us up and said, we want you to bring our library into the 21st century. And we said, well, you know, first you need to bring your building into at least the 20th century. This was an institution that 10 years ago was almost bankrupt, and so they had let their facilities really go. They'd had an infusion of money and had started to fix things up, and we came in on about the second major project that they undertook. Here's the building. It's on the Upper West Side of New York. It's a little dark in the photo, but you can see it's a huge Victorian Gothic building built at the turn of the century. It has this wonderful tower that has all the book stacks in it, all the shelving for the library, with this wonderful room that you can see there. Leaded glass windows. The only way you can get to it is from across the roof. We're not sure what they were using it for. If anyone can figure out how they can use it legally, since you can only get to it from the roof, you're hired. They were using it for storage at the time. One of the first things we did on the project was to tackle the windows. They had leaded glass windows that were single glazed in wood frames. They were buckling, threatening to fall out on the street. As a matter of fact, some of them already had. And the college is actually part of a complex of 5 buildings. It takes up an entire city block in New York. And they had systematically been going through the other buildings and ripping out the wood frame windows and replacing them with aluminum replacement windows in a lovely salmon pink color that they thought matched the brick pretty well. So we spent a great deal of time and effort helping them find solutions that would provide the insulation they needed with double pane construction and the lead glazing that wouldn't break the bank. And we finally did that, and that was one of the huge victories on the project. The slide on the right is the before picture. The slide on the left shows them installed. Very little difference in appearance. The new aluminum, they were actually aluminum framed windows that we put in, but with a custom profile that mimicked the design of the original wood frame windows. In terms of campus context, as I mentioned, this was part of a huge complex of buildings that had been built successively over a period of about 50 years. And it was an urban block in New York City, and they were all connected internally. So rather than looking at campus planning, where you're looking at how a separate library connects across a quad to a classroom building to a residence facility, you were applying the same principles really to enclosed interior space. This was an early sketch we did. Here's the library. Here's the main entrance of the campus, and talking to them about how they could create a campus street that would connect the chapel and administration, a student lounge, and a cafe into the library. So they had, you know, McKinley Street through the center of their academic complex. The library was a vertical library, which is not these days the ideal way to plan a library. You can see here it's 7 floors. So we struggled a lot with the zoning of it, of how to make this library work when you had rare special collections in shelving systems down in their very leaky basement, and then a main service floor. We actually finally zoned it as 3 main service floors here. And then the top 2 floors are going to be phase 2, which will be a kind of an incubation lab, a research and development space for the library to develop software and publications. Now, the first impression of this place was not great. I'll show you in the next slide. There was a huge vaulted lobby with what we came to know as the stair to nowhere. The entire thing is beige, as you can see. There it is. The photos stitched together. these beautiful vaulted spaces with these, they're plaster, but these beautiful columns, hanging fluorescent lights, bare bulbs. This guy with the white hair is the cost estimator who kept shaking his head saying, this is going to cost a lot. And this was the first impression of the library. Nothing about books, nothing about a service point. Not even sure when you got there whether you were in the library or not. We looked at a number of ways to use that. We looked at building a mezzanine within the space. You can see there in section, which turned out to be not cost effective. And we also looked at punching some holes for windows in the existing walls between the arches so that when you walked into that space, you could really see the library beyond. And here it is in its finished form. A lot of it done with color. This was not a high budget project, so you know the blue paint costs as much as beige paint was sort of our mantra. We did replace the stairs and the stair railings and put in some new lighting. And I think here you can start to see the windows. This window goes into the cafe. This window goes into the library. You can see the service desk of the library proper beyond. This is the cafe. One of the things, I don't know where Bracken Library is on this yet, but many of the library projects that we work on, there's a lot of emphasis on having gathering spaces, social spaces within the library, places where you can just grab a cup of coffee, sit down, work together in a more informal atmosphere. And so we developed this cafe. It has 4 television screens so that they can simultaneously broadcast quietly multiple programs. It has a little coffee area with Starbucks. It's wireless and has power connections. So you often see people in there working on their laptops. Very crowded most of the time. And there you can see the windows that look back across the stair hall into the main library. So the 21st century library, okay, we've got the building fixed up. We've got a nice entrance. What's going to make the library tick? So we use a phrase in library design where we say, let's throw everything out on the lawn and then pick what we want to keep and decide what we need. And a lot of it's about starting over with these old libraries because many of them are a size that they have been renovated repeatedly, but nothing has been thrown away. In this case, it had not even really been renovated repeatedly. You can see the library had great structure. I mean, it had these wonderful arched ceilings, the leaded glass windows, very good light, which we were able to keep, but then old card catalogs that nobody used, these crazy little TV setups, I guess, for watching videos. And the place was deserted all the time. No one was going in there. So the other thing that was a challenge in working on this project is that the library, in addition to being vertical, has very long and narrow floor plates. Great for getting light across it, but kind of low capacity in terms of ability to hold either collection or seating on each floor. This is the main service floor, service desk here. This is the lobby with the stair to nowhere, as well as a central stair that became the main circulation spine vertically through the building. Here's the cafe and the connection back into the adjacent building that is how you enter the campus. And here's a picture of that main floor, now transformed. Gone are the little TVs and the card catalogs and so on, and instead full of technology. Here we are again. So that was the first floor. Come into the library, get the tools the students really need, the technology, the access to electronic information resources, the service points, the staff that can help people with their research on the first floor. And then this is the third floor, and what they had 2 needs that they really wanted. One was that they wanted a traditional reading room. Every project in New York is influenced by the New York Public Library, which has this absolutely fabulous reading room that was renovated probably about 5 or 6 years ago by Davis Brody. It has a ceiling, you know, with angels painted in murals on it, lots of gilt. It's beautiful, and it was a beautiful restoration job. So with every library we do, we hear, could you make it like the New York Public Library? Well, If you have the budget, yes. They didn't, but we did do some work to give them that traditional space and to make it a little more multifunctional for them, because they weren't a wealthy institution that could really have spaces dedicated to just one use. We put adjacent to it a series of classrooms with small breakout spaces attached to those for group work. And even this main reading room is multifunctional. It has audiovisual systems, power and data connections so that it can be used for multiple presentations, book signings, fundraising events, you name it. So here's some pictures. This shows the main reading room and then the group study rooms, the breakout spaces beyond it. Because of the height of the ceiling, you'll see a lot of places we just use glazing above a datum line for the wood trim to show off those arches that go through the ceiling. Another picture of a group study room. Again, a red wall, red paint, costs the same as beige. One of the classrooms, very interested in keeping a balance between the historic structure here, these existing corbels which we maintained, but then bringing in a little bit more forward-looking design aesthetic through the use of these air-on chairs, incorporation of technology in the spaces. There's a more traditional shot. That's their New York Public Library reading room shot. Okay, so now they're ready to start phase 2. And phase 2 is, I think, where they really unlock the floodgates and look at these upper floors and how they can really leverage the space they have and the funding they have to develop some spaces that really promote learning, promote a creative environment. We've had lots of discussions with them about what kinds of spaces are good for project work, which is not anything new to you. I mean, look at your design studios. You work in a big open space, and it's wonderful for sharing ideas sometimes, but to academics, to librarians, they're used to their enclosed offices and the hierarchy of that, and so these are new ideas to them. So we spent some time with them envisioning that, is our buzzword. This is a space they're getting ready to renovate. This is one of the original photographs of it. You know, again, they never really renovated. They'd taken out the light fixtures and the furniture, but all of the guts are still there with these great arched ceilings. And here, this is again, walking through what's there now. This is one of our envisioning sessions. This was the librarian and the donor, and we worked with a fellow named Matt Taylor, who does quite a bit of work with groups like this, helping them to articulate what it is that are their goals and how they might be able to realize those in built space. There's some of the bubble diagrams that we produced. Wonderful to have the donor for the project involved in the design of it, a terrific person. You know, producing, this happens to be from another project, New School University in New York, where we did some master planning. I didn't have any of the graphics from the phase 2 work, but you know, that kind of really looking at the adjacencies to libraries in this case and how they would come together. And some images of what they're moving towards in terms of technology. These from Rice University and this from New School. To start thinking how they can take that building and be a little bit more expressive of some of the research and development work they'd like to do. So that's Teachers College. Can everyone hear okay? Is it good? Yeah? Okay. The other project that I brought to talk about is a project that has been in design for about a year, year and a half, that is just starting construction. So I don't have a lot of finished photos, but I thought it was a good project for this group because it blends both architectural issues and some site planning and design issues as well. And I won't embarrass myself by trying to play landscape architect. But I will touch on some of those. This is a project at Philadelphia University. It's the old Philadelphia College of Textiles, which has an architecture school. Anyone here have connections there? Because I'm going to talk about the architecture faculty. No, okay. And it's a small school. It has very strong design programs, and they've just become a university, and they're trying to move into a position where they really are more of a liberal arts school, support liberal arts programs and business programs, and recognize that design students and business students are sometimes different in what they expect and what they need at an institution. And they are upgrading their campus facilities in order to accommodate that with new athletic facilities, a campus center with food service, and so on in it. The campus context here, the important things about this project were fitting a relatively large building with big spaces, dining halls, performance halls, and so on, into a campus that is really very small scale, as you'll see as I go through the following slides, and with a variety of styles incorporated into it. The other thing that was an ongoing challenge in finding design solutions was that they had parking problems and they had stormwater runoff problems, and the city was about at the end of their rope in terms of giving the university any leeway in resolving these issues. So here's the existing campus. A number of small-scale buildings. These are kind of 1950s box brick buildings, but these are old houses that were part of an estate that were purchased by the institution and were being used as classroom buildings. There is a wonderful green space here, and it's pretty close into the center of Philadelphia. So the students who go there, many of them come from the city, and they really value the urban or the landscape and the suburban park-like environment of their campus. And so we started with programming. We started with student focus groups to find out what they wanted in the building and what they wanted for the character of the building. And that was mentioned repeatedly. You know, please don't ruin our park that's in the middle of our campus. So here's an idea of the variety of buildings they have on campus in the next several slides. This is the architecture building. This is a library, which was actually done by Shepley Bulfinch about 20 years ago. This is the administrative office known as the White House, complete with a White House-like fountain, which they're very proud of out in front. And this is immediately adjacent to the site for the campus center. This is their existing student center, a stucco building that had started its life as a kind of a stick-style cottage, and then had been at some point bought by one of the Standard Oil heirs and stuccoed over, and then purchased by the university. See inside. This is what they were living with as a student union building. Pool, vending, and meeting facility. Beautiful mansion with beautiful wood paneling, but not really conducive to the sort of spaces and the scale of spaces they needed. This is the site, and this is the runoff issue. Let me go back. The whole campus slopes downhill, and you can see a bit of a drainage swale here that is right in the middle of the site. This is part of a natural watershed system, and what was happening was, as the university built more and more, their buildings, the runoff from their buildings and their parking lots was draining down a cliff across this road, which is one of the major commuting routes into Philadelphia, and into the Wissahickon River, which feeds the city of Philadelphia water supply. So every time there was a big rain, they would, in the winter, they would have black ice on the road. The city would need to close the road. It was not a happy situation. So a lot of our work was surrounding trying to find a solution to that. The other thing that was interesting was the involvement of the design community on campus. And you know, I have to say that there was, you know, the university had recently built a few new buildings, and they were all pretty conservative in design, a lot like the library. And so the architecture department really approached this new architect selection with some skepticism. So we organized a series of workshops, and we worked at we worked with them. You know, you have this, let's look at images, let's talk, let's get the architecture students, the architecture faculty, the business faculty, and the business students together and look at images and find the common ground of what appeals to people and what's appropriate for the site. We did a few design workshops down there. This is some of the design team with a site model as well as sketches too, and we had lots of foam blocks that people could play with and look at the massing of this building within the existing campus. And we also use SketchUp, although not so much with the client because it's a little intimidating. It looks like the barren wasteland, but for us it was helpful to start looking at the massing of these buildings. Are you using that at all here, SketchUp? Yeah? Yeah. This was an early scheme. This is a representation of the White House, the early building I showed you, and then the new campus center going in there. So we finally tried to develop a design solution where the building was really nestled into a hillside so that the scale difference of these spaces didn't overwhelm the existing structures. In order to help with the runoff issue, we tried to minimize the surface area by putting parking actually for the campus center below the new recreation center that was being built. Again, looking at the hillside and how you could work with that. And we really worked with Carroll Johnson Associates as landscape architects to develop the need for stormwater detention on site as a site feature for the building. So here you see the campus center. This is the White House. This is the new athletic center, which is built by another firm simultaneously designed to this building. So the expectation was that we would work together in order to do the site development around that. Our firm held the contract for the site development. Below this is a 200-car parking garage that brings service into the lowest level of the campus center. And here's the site stormwater management system. You can see here, this side of the building is a dining hall with a terrace that overlooks this, and it's a ravine that has, it's a natural ravine that has been excavated out more deeply to expose some rock ledges, plantings around it, bridges across it, and the idea is to let the stormwater fill it up and hold it there so it can be released more gradually into the hillside, and to really develop that as a feature within the site rather than a detention pond somewhere off on the edge that you screen that you don't want people to see, but you have to have it. So, and here's another picture again of the main floor plan athletic center. We worked a lot with the spaces within the building. You can see it's very long and narrow. That was a function of the site, and it actually steps down. So at this end of the site, you come in adjacent to some large performance halls, lounge spaces, and you travel along. There's a stair that comes down here. This is a post office coffee shop. And at the lower level, you enter it from an entire floor below at this end, which is reflective of the hillside condition. So at the lower level, you have the bookstore, main dining hall, as opposed to the coffee shop upstairs. And then the third floor is student services offices. The original plan was that these would stay in the student center, the stucco building I showed you earlier on. But when we did the cost analyses for this, it was actually more cost effective to move them into the new building than to try and renovate that building. And they'd budgeted just really enough in the existing building for some paint and wallpaper and a few life safety code upgrades. And when we really got into it, it needed so much structural work that they just couldn't do it within the project budget. So those were added in kind of a crow's nest together with student organization offices, meeting rooms, and so on for student government that overlook the performance space in the main lobby of the building. So again, in terms of design language, what did we do to bridge the gap between the business majors and the architecture students? Well, we did get them to accept a relatively contemporary design language. We worked a lot on incorporating sustainable design features into the project, the primary one being the site, the stormwater management systems. And we worked to reduce the scale of the building so that it was more compatible with the small houses and estates houses that were on the campus. So here it is. It's under construction now. This is one of the short elevations of it. It's precast concrete and curtain wall system with an aluminum sunscreen system, copper roofs, and a large display area. They have a huge fashion design school. So this was an advertisement for one of their end-of-the-year fashion show. And the top elevation is the side that faces the White House, the administration building. You can see here how it steps down. So you enter at this level, or you enter a story below. This is a bookstore. This is a terraced area with tables, coffee shop, things like that. And then this is the performance space in the lobby at the upper end. This is the side looking at it from the ravine, as the stormwater management feature came to be called. And you can see very glassy elevations with the aluminum screens on it, and some terrace areas that overlook the site. And this was the artist rendering that was done for the dedication, A Beacon at Night. I mean, that was the thing the president of the institution wanted the most, was to have a place on campus that was bright. Incidentally, it's kitty-corner to the architecture and landscape architecture buildings. So for those late nighters, there's a place to go get coffee, which was just huge for them. They didn't have that at all. And that's it. And that's the projects. How'd I do? Not bad. The how did I do was about time.
Okay.
Not bad? Okay. Did you turn it off?
Okay, now, can you hear me? Is that working back there? Okay, good. Okay, we're going to stay for a moment, at least, in the world of academia. I'm with HNTB now. I'm an associate vice president there. I've been with HNTB for about a year. Prior to joining them, I worked with Carroll R. Johnson Associates for 10 years and was a principal at the time I left. And again, focusing, as Joe said, mostly on transportation projects, as the members of the Introduction to Landscape Architecture class who were here for the 12:30 lecture saw a whole bunch of that stuff. So I want to talk about one of those projects that I did at Carroll R. Johnson Associates, and then I'm going to talk about a large-scale planning study that I've been working on and will continue to be working on for several years at HNTB. This project we did for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And you'll see, just Malcolm alluded to it earlier this afternoon, Frank Gehry is peeping out of the background of this particular shot there. That's the new Stata Center that's recently been completed on the MIT campus. MIT, over the past 10 years, has been going through a major series of upgrades and new buildings to their campus. This is the core of the campus. For those of you who are familiar with it, the big dome is right here. This is Massachusetts Avenue going through the middle of campus. The Charles River is out here. Kendall Square down in here. One of the joys of this particular project was that we got to work with 3 major architects who are all doing buildings along Vassar Street. This is the Stata Center by Frank Gehry here. Right across the way is a building by Charles Correa called the Brain and Cognitive Sciences Center. And then Stephen Hall from New York City was doing a dorm building down at this end of Vassar Street. So we had an occasional clash of ideologies between architects as we tried to resolve issues with all 3 of them, which was fun. Vassar Street, which is the blue line right down the center here, is about a mile long. It used to be the back door of campus. You know, all of the focus was towards the river, but as the campus has grown fairly steadily back towards Cambridge Center, up into this area, Vassar Street has changed its role in the campus, and it's become sort of the front door. It's the place where the new student arriving on campus drives down and gets introduced to what MIT is all about. It wasn't much of an introduction for a very long time. These are the pictures of what was there before. You know, a 6-foot bituminous concrete sidewalk, about 40 to 45 feet of roadway paving, and a similar sidewalk on the other side. It got a little bit better. We got a few trees over here when you got into the main portion of the campus, but still not much of an image if you're bringing your child and they're getting ready to pay $40,000 a year or whatever the admission is. You don't want them driving down that. So they decided it was time for a major image overhaul. And Carol R. Johnson Associates was fortunate enough to be selected to do the work. Now, they wanted to accomplish a lot with this redesign. The first thing that they wanted to do was to get rid of as much traffic paving as possible. And like I said, they had 45 or 46 feet, something like that, between the curbs. They wanted to cut that down to the smallest space possible. They wanted to make nice big sidewalks because obviously they got a lot of student traffic moving up and down this, and there was completely inadequate space for that. They wanted, you know, the standard street trees, street lights, and all that other good stuff that you get with a streetscape improvement. And they also wanted to look at a different way to handle bicycle traffic on the campus. You know, the traditional way of accommodating bicycles is you stripe off a lane right next to the curb for them between the curbs, and that's where the bicycles move. They wanted to bring in a system that's called a cycle track system that put the bicycles outside the curbs up with the pedestrians. And this is something that's very commonly done in Europe, but from what we could research and find out about, it had never been done in the United States before. And it took a lot of convincing to the planning department and the traffic department at the city of Cambridge that this kind of a system would work. The project, half of the project has now been built. It's been in service for maybe 2 years, and I saw the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator from the city of Cambridge the other day, and she didn't try and strangle me about this, so I assume that it's working well. But we'll find out, I guess, as the years go by. Now, the other secret to this, and what's not showing in this pretty section, is that underneath all of this is just an absolute spaghetti bowl of utilities. And the utilities ended up being sort of the defining factor in a lot of the design. It dictated how much we could raise and lower the road, because as we widened the sidewalks, the wider the sidewalks got, the farther down the road got pushed. And it decided where we could put trees, it decided where we could put lights and do all kinds of other things. And in fact, about a quarter of the budget for the total project ended up being invested in moving utilities, relocating or taking some out, abandoning some that they no longer needed, doing capacity improvements on others, and so forth. So there was a huge effort involved in getting something that we could build on top of here. Now, if we go back to that map again, just for 1 second, well, I'm not going to bother going back, but one of the issues that I said was this, you know, this street is a mile long, and it basically has one road down in the middle of it that breaks it into 2 pieces. So it has these very long, very sort of out of pedestrian scale sections to it. There's no regular block rhythm that breaks it up. So one of the things that we identified that we wanted to accomplish very early in the program was trying to come up with some sort of a device to break the length of the street up into a series of what looked like more or less normal pedestrian blocks. And one of the devices that we came up with to do that was a series of mid-block crossings. And we sort of jumped on these as opportunities to do a lot of different things. They also became traffic calming installations because with that long a distance, you know, vehicle speeds are naturally going to creep up the longer the cars have to run. So we introduced speed tables to slow them down, put in special paving for the pedestrians, and did a lot of work with the lighting to focus attention on the locations for safety purposes and to create sort of a sculptural effect with the light fixtures that we chose. So it became sort of the defining theme of much of the roadway. Now, the problem with doing large streetscape projects is when you try and show them on PowerPoints, it really doesn't work. because you get these great big long things here that nobody can actually read. But this is the eastern part. This is the part that's been built. This is the Stata Center down here. This is Charles Correa's building up there. You can start to see sort of the rhythm of the tree plantings that we were trying to do, which was responding to the openings and access points to the buildings along each side. You can see how we've tried to sort of do some bending and twisting with the roadway to introduce some chicanes to be another traffic calming feature, and so forth. Here's one of our mid-block crossings. Here's another one down here. There's probably another 250 feet to the end of the roadway before we hit Mass Ave and this eastern part comes to a close. Just looking at a couple of more details, here's another sort of contract document level design of that crosswalk. As we were working with the cycle track, the way the cycle track is supposed to operate is on this side, it moves with the traffic in the street. So on this side, you're going eastbound. On that side, you're going westbound. You have to cross over. If you come out of a building here, you have to cross over and use the cycle track in the other direction. So that introduced all sorts of complications of how we move the bicycles back and forth across the street, which got to be a lot of fun. This is a detail of the planting, and one of the things we talked about earlier this afternoon was treeways. And we used treeway system for planting all of the street trees along here to try and introduce something that would be a long-term proposition to maintaining the health and vitality of the trees. And we had some interesting questions about that earlier. These are some finished pictures of the project. Here's a cycle track on one portion, still with a decently wide sidewalk for the pedestrians. Same thing here, we have a bicycle who's being nice and staying within the cycle track, so we know that that works. This is a night shot, again showing how you start up onto the cycle tracks. The bikes actually move back into the intersections, into between the curbs for the stoplight intersections on either end, and then pull off a couple hundred feet down the block so that they're moving with the traffic in the intersections, which seem to be a more logical way to process them through the intersections. One of the things, we are going for this sort of high-tech look with everything that we tried to do here, thus the choice of the particular light fixture and some of the other fixtures that we had on the project. One of the cool little things we found were these little, well, they're really lane markers, roadway lane markers. They're about 4-inch diameter. They're like a hockey puck. But inside that, they've got a little LED light and a little solar collector, so they're solar powered. So you basically just core a hole in the pavement and you pop this thing in, and then you forget about it. And it's just there until the LED burns out, which is years. So we used a series of those running down the edges of the cycle track to define that and highlight it at certain places where we knew that there would be conflict points coming up. So it was a very fun, very interesting project to work with. I'm really going to be interested in seeing how the second half comes out, because that's a much bigger piece of the project. Bragging rights on this one. This particular light fixture is the Sirius fixture made by Hess America. It was the first major installation of that fixture in the United States for the company, so Vassar Street is now on the cover of their catalog. And I just saw the pavers that we used were also ended up on the cover of Hanover Pavers' most recent brochure. So, we got 2 covers, even if they're not magazine covers, at least we got some covers out of the project, so that's great. Okay, changing scale a little bit, and for all the planning students who aren't here today. Since I came to HNTB, I've been involved in a very large-scale planning study in Maine. We're looking at 100 miles of Route 1, which for those of you who know Maine, Route 1 runs along the coast and connects all those wonderful little towns along the coast all the way up to Bar Harbor and past all the way up to the Canadian border. We've been working for the Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation, to develop an integrated land use and transportation plan for this area, because they've been having a lot of problems working with the communities and trying to come to some realization of what this roadway can and can't do for those communities in the long term. 120 miles, there is no alternate corridor that they can shift traffic over to. This is what they've got to work with, this just 2-lane ribbon of highway. And obviously, it's a very heavy tourist route. This is how a lot of tourists go up to Bar Harbor, as much as they try to route them in different directions. It's also a heavy haul truck route. It's the supply route for all of those coastal communities. So you've got all of these things that are going to just create transportation conflict and land use conflict in the corridor. Why undertake this effort? Well, these are two signs from a previous road improvement project that were basically right across the road from each other, expressing the dichotomy of opinion of what needs to happen with this road. We need to do everything to it, and we need to do nothing to it. So after working after the DOT got its head handed to it several times, that what they were doing was not appropriate, they sort of stepped back and said, okay, we need to take a bigger look at this whole issue, get the communities to work with us, and come up with a way that we can try and meet the needs as best as possible of everybody, of the DOT, of the drivers, of the communities, of the residents, and so forth. So that's what we've been doing. We've started into the process about a year ago, doing just some initial meetings with all of the 20 communities who are part of this piece of the corridor to talk about what is it that we need to accomplish, what are the issues that we're dealing with, to get them to buy into the whole process. Because if the communities aren't involved and if they don't accept this as a route to a solution, we're not going to get anywhere. So one of the key points of this whole process has been developing a memorandum of understanding between the communities and the DOT. And that basically said, the MOU basically says, we'll work together in harmony to solve this problem. It says it in a lot more fancy language than that, but that's all it says. We're getting ready to start phase 2A, which is sort of the inventory work and the detailed planning look at what's going on in the corridor existing and what the future transportation and land use development demands are. And then we're going to move into phase 2B, which is scenario development, looking at different options of what the future of this roadway might be. And develop some strategies about how to do that. And those strategies can include anything from changing the comprehensive plans of the local communities, changing their subdivision bylaws, developing new roadway development guidelines for the DOT, so on and so forth. Anything is on the table for us to recommend as a methodology to resolve this conflict between the land use development and the transportation infrastructure requirement. And then we'll do a report. This whole process, phase 2A, 2B, and 3, is going to take us about another 3 years to complete. So this is a very long-term kind of study. So what are we talking about? For those of you who are familiar with Maine, Portland is down here. Portland's about 40 miles up the coast. Brunswick is another 20 miles. And that's where our corridor starts, and it winds all the way up through Bath, Wiscasset, Damariscotta, Waldoboro, Bucksport, and Searsport, Belfast, and ends at Stockton Springs here. That's about 120 miles from Brunswick. Augusta is here. Bar Harbor is over in here. And we've been doing a lot of, sort of typical planning. This is the first planning study of this type and scale that I've been involved with, so this has been a real learning experience for me. I'm starting to look at some of the issues about access management, urban compact areas, which are state agreement areas between states and communities about maintenance and municipal services and so forth. Starting to look at some of the characteristics of travel that occur along that corridor. How far people travel to go to work. What times of day they travel, where they start and where they end, and so on and so forth. Looking at the growth in the corridor, this is actually an extremely confusing but very interesting diagram that tries to represent, over the course of the past 5 decades or so, when did most of the growth in any particular town occur? And you'll see places like Bath. Wait a minute, where's Bath? I can't find. There we go. Bath is a very old community, has its history in shipbuilding around the turn of the century, the last century. And so most of its housing stock was in place, very early, and there's been relatively little growth lately. versus someplace like Warren, which is a community that had was a farming community, very rural, and only in the past 20 years or so has started to see a lot of residential development, because people have identified that as places where you can put new subdivisions because there's only rural development. So it's sort of an interesting graph to study the trend of growth along the corridor and suggest what might be coming in the future. Now, of course, you look at traffic volumes, and surprise, surprise, the highest traffic volumes are occurring in July and August. That's the tourist season. That makes sense. Where the growth is happening in the state, most of the growth is happening in that southern tier, that area that we're dealing with in this particular study. So how are we going to account for that in the future? How does that affect the designs that we do and so on? This is a graph that starts to look at what projected growth is through the next 20 years, because that's obviously going to have a big impact on how much transportation capacity we have. If we're looking at basically doubling the growth of the size of any given town in the next 20 years, that's going to present some issues for us, and how do we accommodate that in the capacity of the area. Looking at the comprehensive plans, we're going to spend a lot of time actually doing analysis of the existing comprehensive plans and zoning bylaws for the towns, because this is typically what you end up with. This is Searsport. Route 1 runs along through here. If you look at the zoning designations of these areas, all of their commercial zone is designated right along Route 1. The next tier back from that is the highest density residential development, and way back behind that is rural land with very low density residential development. So the emphasis is clearly on getting people as close to that Route 1 corridor as possible. That's where they want to be. That's where the access is. That's where the land prices are higher. That's where access to potential customers is greatest, and so forth. So that puts even more stress on that Route 1 corridor. We spent a couple of weeks, we spent about a week this past summer actually out driving the corridor, walking our way through each town, trying to identify what the major issues were, both in terms of transportation issues, land use issues, scenic value, recreational value, so on and so forth, and did a whole series of diagrams talking about each town and what we saw were its opportunities and its problems that it had to deal with. We took those diagrams back out to the communities and said, okay, here's what we think about your town. Do you agree with us? Are there problems that we're missing? Are there other things we need to know about? Did we get it right? And we asked people to sort of prioritize what were their key issues, what were the things that they felt needed the most focus on, needed to be solved most urgently as we started pressing forward with that study. And that will form the basis of more analysis that we'll be doing in the next phase of the project. Now, that sort of starts to touch on the issue of public process. And obviously, as I said, we have 20 different communities that we're trying to deal with here. So we have a very involved and complicated public process system set up to work both all the way from the town scale up to the full corridor scale. And this diagram shows how we've taken basically 4 and 5 town clusters through the corridor and brought them together and assigned them as a group that we'll be working with, trying to force them to work with each other a little bit as we move the process forward. The process starts with our town response panels. Each town is going to have a group of probably 8 to a dozen people put together who will be the people commenting on issues in that particular town. They talk to the next level, which is the sub-area work groups, which are those 5 areas that we talked to that I showed in the last diagram. They're overseen by a steering committee, and that's where the real sort of final decision-making level of this whole process will rest. And then there's a policy group, which is really the state agencies. The state agencies are not making the decisions in this process. The citizens are making the decisions. The state agency's charge is to figure out how to implement those decisions and what they need to do within their organizations and their structures to make those decisions implementable. So the focus is really at this level of getting the citizens to be involved and put forward their thoughts and concerns and bless ideas and so forth. And the state sort of takes a little bit of a back seat, which is what the towns wanted. Some of the issues that we've identified, so forth, obviously speeding is a big issue. Interesting that the number 2 issue out of everything that they identified consistently across all the communities was image and aesthetics, because they understand that this corridor, a vital part of their town's future is in tourism, and if you start mucking up the image, you're going to lose that tourism opportunity, and you'll start to lose the potential for development and the investment in the land and so forth. Safety, communities working together has been an issue in the past. Hopefully we'll be addressing that through the framework that we've established. Truck noise and so forth, we can skip through those. These are some of these are interesting. These are sort of the towns talking about themselves. A lot of the communities, as I showed before, talked about the relationships with the DOT not being great in the past. And so a lot of this process is going to be about a PR program for the DOT to improve their image and their standing with the communities so that they can continue to work together. This is the one that I love, though. Almost every single town said this. We're doing a great job managing our land and our development issues, but the towns to either side of us, they're not doing very well. So at least we have a common theme to work with, and everybody chuckles when they see that one. But they do. The important thing, though, is that they want to work together, that they understand that they're all involved, they all have a stake in this thing long term, and they want to work together, and they want the state's leadership to try and make that happen. They don't want the state to be in control, they don't want the state dictating to them, but they want the state there making the process move forward and helping drive the decision-making process. High degree of multimodal support, which really surprised me. People are very concerned about bicycles because this is a big bicycle route along that corridor. Pedestrians, they want to take advantage of their water links to develop ferry systems. There's a new railway system that they've put in place recently that connects from Brunswick up at least as far as Rockland. The people north of Rockland are very interested in expanding that to connect to their communities farther up the line. So multimodal is going to be a big deal in the overall solution to the issues here. So what does all of this mean? What's the genesis and the issue? You know, it's about how do we make transportation and land use work together? How can we bring these two? Because obviously each one is interdependent on the other. As you improve transportation, you put stress on land use. As you increase land use, you put more stress on transportation. So trying to work together between these two modes, these two issues, to develop a solution that works for both sides of the equation is the real challenge that we have to respond to in this project. And again, it's important to recognize that it isn't just the communities or just the state or even just the federal agencies that are driving this. This is really bringing all three of those agencies together, finding the appropriate level for them to work together, and getting them to cooperate to drive to a solution that will define how the future of this corridor is identified. Like I said, I've never done anything like this. I'm a little bit in a daze during a lot of it, but I'm learning a lot of interesting things. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities to get involved and to make this corridor a great place. You know, I have sort of emotional attachments to it because I was born in Maine and my mother lives in Maine. So it's a significant project to me, and it'll be an interesting one to follow through the 3 years of the remaining process that we have. That wraps up our presentation for today, and so we'd be happy to take any questions or anything else that people would like. I don't know if you want to moderate questions or.
No. In this range of scales that you presented from small to large, have you ever run into each other professionally and working with each other?
That's why we're still married.
I must admit that the most I've heard about Tom's work is at these Ball State lectures. We have a very traditional marriage. When we come home, it's about the family and the kids and each other and where we're going and what we're doing. So in spite of the fact that our offices are about a block away from each other and Shepley collaborates occasionally with firms Tom works for, there hasn't been much face-to-face. Now we've been designing an addition to our house together, and that's another lecture.
I've got.
Another question, and that applies to both current places of employment. I'm wondering what role tradition has in both of the offices. Are Mrs. HNT and B still alive?
People ask me what HNTB stands for. My standard response is a bunch of dead guys. HNTB was founded 90 years ago, so I hope they're not alive.
I know in the firm with such a wonderful name and heritage architecturally, I'm just wondering if there's ghosts of the founders.
There are, yeah. H.H. Richardson founded Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott, and I'm not good at dates, but it was about 130 years ago. We still have his chair, which is enormous and carved wood. Tony, have you been to our office? I think you need to come next time you're in town. All of you are invited to come anytime you're in town. We still have his chair in our conference room with a velvet rope across it. When I started working there, Mr. Shepley, who was the grandson of the Shepley that was related directly to the H.H. Richardson family, was still in the corner office. In the years that I have been there, it has moved at time warp speed from being the Boston bow tie firm, basically the Boston Brahmin firm, to a firm that is very diverse. It's 50% women. We just elected a woman president last year, Carol Wedge, and we're just actually getting ready to move into new office space, and it will be the first time in 30 years. The office has only been in 2 other locations in its 125-year history. Which is more a function of outgrowing the space and real estate prices in the financial district of Boston than desire. So yes, those ghosts are there. We try and embrace them when they're good, and we try and move on when they're not. But it does keep us going, and I think the biggest heritage is trying to keep quality and talent going in what we do.